Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Robot Wars review podcast. I am Toon Ganondorf, and with me are my esteemed colleagues, Tale of the Toaster.
Hello.
And the man himself, Nick Weston.
Hello, everybody. Looking forward to everybody's favourite part of these series. Forget the 10 parts that go over months and months. It's all about the review podcast, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
This is wonderful spell of just 1 to 2 hours, or 3 in the case of the last one, but we'll try and be on our best behaviour.
So, unlike the last one, this one's going to be a little bit different. As you guys will recall from the Top 100 Ultimate Countdown podcast, a lot of it was me and Toast grilling Nick on his opinions. This one was a group project. So, for some background, those at home, the project originally started from our friend Anthony Murney of Team S-Tech, seen on the show Driving Push to Exit with his friends, suggested a podcast where we would discuss who's everybody's favourite machine. Let's all just get together and talk about our favourite robots. And from there, it sort of evolved into, how about instead of a podcast, we just do, another Ultimate Countdown, and we make it, instead of our favourites, we make it our iconic robots.
Maybe he was onto something. Maybe a 10-hour podcast would be pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. And so basically, that's how it came about. Let's make a definitive top 100, and that's the point where we realised, hey, we did a top 100 battles, but we've never done a top 100 robots. And so here we are, on the other side of it.
Yes, I think it was a kind of 4 to 5 hours later, delving into the night, we had a top 45-ish.
Yeah, it was a long, good one. It took about 7 months of discussion to get the full 100 settled.
Yeah.
And then obviously all the scripts written and the recordings done.
Yeah, I was going to say about another 17 months to get all the recordings together, but, we got there. We got there.
So what we'd like to do for this review podcast is we're going to go through some suggested omissions from the list, from readers and listeners. Also, then we'll move through each group of 10 and discuss each group as a whole, whether there's any that would go up or down now. Because like the Ultimate Countdown, and Toast and I can now sympathise with Nick, is that our opinions have changed on some. Some might go higher, some might go lower, and seeing audience response to some makes us realise certain things. But there were about 10 to 12 of us involved, most of whom voiced parts of the list. And yeah, whilst not everybody can be on this review, we feel that we'll share their opinions and stuff as we discuss each one, because certain robots had passionate fans more than others.
Yeah, absolutely. We may not have made it as far as we did on the first little planning session, if not for the likes of Mark and Luke helping to steer the course. And at the end of the day, more opinions was better than fewer opinions when getting everything solidified, especially when I think what's not obvious is that we actually do start with the top 10. We have to work backwards with these things. You can't just say, right, we're going to start with pièce de résistance. Where do we go from here?
Yeah. So we did, that's a good thing to clarify. We did actually start with 1 and worked our way down. And around about, early on we were saying things like, 50 is going to end up being something like IG-88 or Tauron.
Oh, mate.
And then you realise that you get to the 40s and you've still got things like Atomic and Bulldog Breed to list. And you're like, okay, maybe Tauron's like 150, not 50.
Yeah, we got to the stage where we're in about the 40s area. We were like, right, the next 5 or 10, I think we should get Major Tom in. And that went on for ages and ages and ages until it finally found its little home. And then we had to bump it down again. And, mate, you don't realise just how much tinkering these type of things require at times. You just, one Saturday morning at 3 a.m, you think, oh, you know what? I would put Rapid at 69th now.
You just kind of have an epiphany in the middle of the night. You know what? I don't think Beast of Bodmin should be on the top 100.
Yeah, we'll leave it in the opening titles, though, to give it its own spotlight, but it's got to drop out.
Poor Beast.
Paul?
Well, that's actually probably a good place to start. So, of our notable omissions, we had a couple of shout-outs for Beast of Bodmin. That's a fairly good one to start with. So, when we did the list, Beast of Bodmin originally made it around about 85, and it was on the list until it got dropped out of the top 100. What do we feel now? Do we feel that our opinion has changed on the exclusion of the former UK champion's successor robot?
Not at all, really. I think Roadblock did envelop the team for its entirety. Beast of Bodmin never really absorbed that to its own resume. It was just the second one. And yes, it made a top 8, but it didn't do a whole lot to get there, honestly.
No,
And
it was in one of the most forgettable heats, and then it was in a very forgettable part of its semi-final as well. So it had an iconic moment, but it needed even just a decent heat. Could have given it a chance, but I think overall, if you're putting something in for a wink alone and a nice design, and for being worse than
technical top 8
Roadblock,
finish, yeah.
Yeah,
At the
it's
end
a
of
bit
the
of a
day,
stretch.
How much weight do you give a top 8 finish? That's really the discussion. And obviously, Hardvark didn't make the list. So you've really got to ask yourself, is Beast of Bodmin Steg 2 or is Beast of Bodmin 3 Stegs to Heaven? And I think that we realised that it was probably 3 Stegs to Heaven.
Yeah.
And hey, it's like we have robots that actually did make the list, like Cherub. It was there once and then left. You've got Beast of Bodmin, who didn't make it, but it's also in every episode. it's kind of there.
Yeah, exactly. Would it rather have had one episode or be a starring light in every single opening titles? I think it got a good deal in the end.
Yeah, did well. So that was a shout from Adam H. Another one of Adam H's shouts, backed up by Retro Ads, was for Wheelsaurus. And can you believe it? I think this is the first time even thinking of Wheelsaurus as a possible contender
Probably
for the top
so.
100.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed that our resident Wheelsaurus lover, Nick, didn't even seem to suggest it.
I think I was
that's our
deep
problem,
down
though.
scared about any potential backlash in any form. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have Wheelosaurus in here, but again, every time I look at the bottom areas of this list, I don't think I can quite justify. It's a good little outside shout, though. Definitely a notable omission,
Yeah.
but I think it always has to stay that way.
It could maybe have squeezed an honourable mention, but I think that would have been the extent that we could have gotten Wheelosaurus.
Yeah.
I think
pretty
for us,
much.
Wheelosaurus is so synonymous with Nick himself. It would be like putting ourselves on the list.
Well, I mean, after the Series 7 bias of the Ultimate Countdown, we didn't want to go with Wheelosaurus bias as well, did we?
Yeah, but I think even then, like, Series 4 really did hype Wheelosaurus quite a bit. And even when I was a kid watching the show, you could see a lot of, you could see Peter Gibson being just like a bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
He's like a little bit of an icon. So, yeah, I reckon I'd probably argue for it to be an honourable mention now. Over something, especially because we've got Psycho Sprout there. It's kind of the same thing.
I probably wouldn't stretch that far, in fairness, but it's nice to highlight.
Yeah. So our next one, which was suggested by quite a few people, and honestly, to the surprise of most of us, was Dreadnought. Which I'll be honest to say that I never really even considered Dreadnought. I sort of put Dreadnought on par with Oblivion and Cruella and some of those sorts of ones. In terms of your early series heat finalist caliber machine, yes, it got a Series 3 heat final, but that's because Ratus didn't move. Yeah, I don't think that I would count Dreadnought close to this, but it was a surprising prevalent opinion. What do you guys think?
Well, it's certainly better than you were giving it credit for just now. It was still a seeded machine in Series 4, a presence in the third episode ever, and had that little narrative arc to it that was highlighted on the VHS as well as the main episode. Big, vibrant design. memorable name. I don't think it was a top 100 robot necessarily, but and yeah, again, the honourable mentions themselves were still hard to contend for. But Dreadnought, I kind of think, would I make space for it in a top 125? Maybe then it kind of jumps in. It's certainly a robot that I like, and it'd be a good bit of representation for the really early days. But that's obviously hard to rate. The only bits of early days we properly had were Cyclops and Cassius mainly. And Roadblock.
Yeah, and Killatron.
True.
And Panic Attack. But anyway, point taken. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Good shout. Good to see some fans for a robot like Dreadnought. But yeah, I think ultimately it would have been a stretch to have it as an honourable mention there. All right, so we've got a few other ones here. We won't go into great detail on them because we want to move on to the proper list. But I'm going to read out a list of suggestions, and I'll get you guys give your thoughts. Close, not close, yes, no, thoughts on it.
Sure.
So we had from Digital Death Squid, we had Judge Shred.
Out of the suggestions, that one for me was the closest. Probably the most.
I remember I actually suggested Judge Shred when we were making the list, and I got shut down pretty emphatically by almost everybody involved. And what people point out, and I always remember it and get convinced by it, but forget promptly a day later, is that aside from Judge Shred 3, it would not even come close. Judge Shred 1 and 2, Series 3 and 4, are possibly two of the most forgettable machines in the history of the show. So really, it is just Judge Shred 3 and, to an extent, Judge Shred 2.5, which is doing all the legwork. And is that alone enough? Maybe, but I think that I'm pretty comfortable with it missing when I remind myself of that fact.
Yeah. I think it's just a case of a lot of potential there with Judge Shred that was never truly met for both the machine and the team to be a more relevant figure on the show, and that probably overall costs it. But as we say, it's one of the stronger shouts. But
yeah.
No, again, I would miss it out still.
Yeah, bear in mind, we had robots like M2 and Synagro didn't even make the list, so I feel like Judge Shred, which is also got an Uta in Series 7 and, did fairly well as a flipper, but didn't have much going on before that. I feel like there's others that I would have had ahead of Judge Shred. Poor Toast, unfortunately M2 didn't get a single shout from any of our beloved readers and listeners. So
guess we'll just have to talk about you another time.
Wheelsaurus 1, M2 nil, mate, I'm sorry.
I mean, there was one comment that predicted that M2 was going to be in the top 50 after we released part 5. I appreciate that one, whoever it was.
So we had a next shout was from Digital Death Squid for Traction, based purely on the fact that it beat Apex, I suppose.
I don't think it's even really the most notable of the school entries from Series 10, honestly. I'd pick Expulsion.
Yeah, who made the 10... Yeah, Series 10, 10 Robot Rumble school teams. Traction comes second for me. I think Expulsion definitely makes the list before Traction does.
Yeah, I agree.
Gravedigger is another shout.
This was one that we had to go over. Like, it was on the honourable mentions.
It was, for a very long time. It was duking out for one of the last spots on the honourable mentions.
Yeah, that's right. And I think ultimately we kind of canned it off thinking, we're not writing a script for it here. We've got purely the visuals to go off, and the visuals of Gravedigger that made it famous were that it was a knockoff of something, just with less vibrant colours, and they certainly amped that up for later appearances, but the later versions of Gravedigger didn't win a fight to add to its resume.
Well, yeah. If those two future installments had even slightly decent campaigns, then it would have been a really decent 90s show. But a brown front hinge flipper that kind of moves around at a decent pace without doing anything impressive in the grand scheme of things isn't really
It was
Carrying
so
too much
hidden
weight.
as well. Like, they could have put it in a Series 4 side event. They could have put it in
Yeah,
Extreme. But it only
exactly.
ever did the UK Championships, and it just had one successful run where it was still overshadowed by other robots with the same weapon, like Firestorm, and even Cassius 2 kind of fell early on.
The team being extremely low key also doesn't help as well.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It looks like it was nudged out of the honourable mentions by, I think, Spikosaurus in the end, and I think that's definitely the right decision.
Yeah.
Considering the overall quality of Spikosaurus's contributions versus Gravedigger's. Gravedigger's contributions really come down to beating Mortis and almost beating Steg, whereas you've got its Series 5 losses and its first and third fights in Series 3 not being particularly memorable. So, I think that was probably ultimately the right call, was to miss Gravedigger. Grim Reaper, definitely not. Grim Reaper is definitely last of all the Series 7 semi-finalists, and by a lot.
Yeah, I guess so. It depends how you treat the Raging Nightmare divide with Raging Reality. But, I mean...
It just came in too late. Again, if it started a series or two earlier, I see potential with the design, and it's a decent enough flipper to have a couple of good campaigns. But with that Series 7 campaign alone, the judges' decisions back-to-back, not the most dominant heat final win, to say the least. There's minor appeal.
Not the most dominant heat at all, really.
Yeah, there's appeal here and there, in and around what Grim Reaper is, but no, I can't say I was ever in support of it being a contender.
Yeah. Grim Reaper, so hang on, Toast, did you seriously just suggest that Raging Nightmare would have theoretically been lower than Grim Reaper? Like, I would have thought Grim Reaper's only competition is Syntaggro for lowest.
Oh, I did forget about Syntaggro. Yeah, that's true. I guess because Raging Nightmare's visual design is a lot more low-key than Grim Reaper, but I wouldn't. I think M2 is probably its closest rival as the other Seventh War's one-off, but obviously, I certainly see a lot more value in M2, but that's just me.
Grim Reaper, I feel like it's getting validated a lot these days, because it used to be always known as the flipper that just couldn't win a battle by knockout, but it actually is and the fact that it had the one of the weakest heats of the classic series, it sort of, I think opinion is changing on Grim Reaper. People do recognise that, yes, it is a good flipper, it just didn't happen to win any fights by knockout.
Yeah, there's you can't really argue not immobilising Gyrobot and Big Nipper and Storm 2 and Can Opener. They're all big, competent, invertible robots.
Exactly. All right. There was a persistent shouting out for Donald Thump. Now, this is an interesting one, because I think you could probably, of all the ones we've listed, it's the one that, as time has gone by, it sort of has stuck around a little bit more. And I think we made this list in mid-2019, and I think that in mid-2020, the fact that that recency bias has sort of diminished a little bit, and Donald Thump still comes front of mind, it is worth noting. I don't think that I would have it, but I just thought that was worth saying.
Yeah, I mean, the topic of Donald Thump is never really going to go away until the certain other connected topic goes away, and that doesn't seem to be happening for quite some time. So, and yeah, of course, Donald Thump also had the little bonus of the fact it was going to have a successor in BattleBots for 2020, pre-COVID, which certainly would have given it a boost. It's hard to say whether it would have been enough, but obviously that never came to fruition anyway, so it's another one of those that you could see as a wildcard honourable mention purely on how memorable of a design it was, but definitely too late in Robot Wars' lifespan to actually contend for the real list.
And then we also had from Samuel Grashoff, he listed a bunch of them, but the one that I've listed out is IG-88 / Vader. IG-88 was the other one alongside Gravedigger who almost made the honourable mentions list. And yeah, as a package between the two of them, what do you guys reckon?
It's an interesting one because by all means, Vader should be the one that's more iconic. It got the heat final first. It was in a... I guess that both of the heats that they were in were kind of equally remembered, but Vader, of course, had its own persistent problem within there of being overshadowed by another massive vertical spinner. But then, to make up for it, it also had Extreme 2 and Series 7. Vader definitely had more appearances, more losses, you could say, but IG-88 had the exact same peak as Vader, but it was a lot more impressive on the way there, and it's still the one that's talked about more as a potential thing, whereas Vader probably showed the extent of what it had.
And yeah, you can probably tell from some mentions, Beeve managed to work a mention of IG-88 into his Anarchy script somehow. So you can tell there was certainly people among us who were passionately pro IG-88. But I agree with Toast, and I think that was ultimately what probably informed us, is that you can't really have one without the other, because you can't argue that they're that apart. What do you think, Nick?
That's the problem in itself, isn't it? They're both so similar in what they are, but people rate them so differently. So it would feel awkward to group them up together. I just think I'd not put either of them in just because it would be awkward, but...
Yeah, there's no doubt to me that IG-88 is the one that would make it out of the two, but again, the late in the lifespan argument, I don't think they were 100 level, but it's a good shout. Could definitely see some people putting them in.
So I suppose here it's a good point to mention there is a couple of robots who were very difficult to rank and ultimately just didn't get ranked properly. And so they were Nemesis, Big Brother, Robot the Bruce, and Body Hammer. And theoretically, all of them were able to be ranked separately, like we had with Steg 2 and Kilohertz and Big Cheese, who all made the list in their own right. These ones all theoretically could, but especially Nemesis and Big Brother, they were just so inseparable from their more famous versions that we kind of just did merge them but didn't say so.
Yeah, especially Nemesis. Like Nemesis, you just associate it with Dietor anyway. I don't think there's any point trying to separate them. They just are together because they both have the same philosophy and identity on the show. So,
and if we were to do a script, we would literally just be saying the exact same thing. Red polka dot for sportsmanship award, fun, fire.
Yeah. I mean, they could have,
etc.
It could have been called Dietor throughout the entire show, and there wouldn't be any difference because the designs were so similar throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. The Big Brother, again, doing a script for Big Brother, all you can really mention is the Altor forfeit. And Joe Watts is cute. Yeah. Essentially, that's all you can say.
Big Brother is Big Brother fun to set up the Joe Watts narrative as a whole going forward, but as its own identity, it's just throwaway to me.
Robot the Bruce and Body Hammer, though, they really were able to be ranked in their own regard, and they didn't make the top 100. Recyclops obviously did. What do you guys reckon about Robot the Bruce and Body Hammer? Do you have any thoughts that they might have been close in hindsight?
The answer is no. I don't think they were close. Recyclops had a lot going for it with the striking design, the pioneering weaponry, the impact of Rex Garrett, and that's not to say that Robot the Bruce didn't have the impact of George Francis, but George was absolutely inseparable from Chaos, whereas Rex kind of did get the credit for his entire campaigns because he was so memorable as the Recyclops guy before Cassius, while George became more known when Chaos surfaced. And visually, there's not much to say about either. Body Hammer was the technical runner-up, and then it did so without doing anything, while Robot the Bruce was a good force in Series 1, but a kind of one-off Series 1 heat winner is almost these days equivalent in value to a one-off heat winner from Series 7 or 10. start of the show versus end of the show. If possibly a bit less in the case of just Series 1.
And obviously there's two more mergers that we will mention. One being Raging Reality and Raging Nightmare, who were kind of merged in the honourable mentions. There was a lot of discussion about Raging Reality making the list alone.
There was a lot of discussion about Raging Nightmare making the list on its own. You can tell viewers there is a disagreement between us as to who would be higher.
Yeah, it was about an even split. I was very pro Raging Reality, Toast was very pro Raging Nightmare, and ultimately Nick just said, let's just chuck them both in the honourable mentions.
Yeah, I didn't care enough either way, to be honest.
They were pushing for 96 to 100 at best, so
it was
probably easier.
Yeah. They genuinely did have the 96th spot together, and we needed to either pick one or agree on a merged segment, and the only obvious thing to do was to just push them down 5 spaces into the honourables, where they could both be treated as however.
We would be very interested, readers, if you are in the live chat or even just in the comments section, let us know if you would split them and which of the two you would have higher. Because obviously Raging Nightmare has the benefit of a better Annihilator performance, the actual semi-final placement, and a grudge match victory over Spawn again. But Raging Reality has obviously more Ooters, it has a more well-known, more watched series, and it has fights with more famous robots like Razor, and has also that technicality of being the robot to immobilize Typhoon too. So there's an argument for each. Would be very interested in hearing what all of you guys think between them.
Yeah.
So that being said, let's start discussing our list, and we will start with the honourable mentions. So our group is, we're going to basically go through each group of 10, and we'll just discuss the group as a whole, who would go up, who might come off or go down, and then we'll move on to the next group. So our honourable mentions, for those who don't have the list in front of them, were Corkscrew, Chomp, the Raging Machines, Hydra, Getrix, Agrobot, Arnold A. Terminator, Spikosaurus, Psycho Sprout, and Weldor.
Yeah, and that's there to kind of be... These would be the robots in our 101 to 110 region. Maybe Psycho Sprout aside, that was a little bit representative of the humour aspect. But
it was a popular pick in the live chat, though.
Yeah, it was justifiable enough, so it was there. So these were in no particular order, but I don't think anyone doubts that the standout, or at least between us, and not necessarily the comments. The comments had their own idea. For us, by far the closest to making the real list was Corkscrew, and that was the first honourable mention for a reason. We were, in hindsight, shocked that it didn't make it, right?
It's one of those Series 5 heat finalists like Crustacean and Cat 3, sort of one of those new ones that came on, became a heat finalist. Corkscrew is a really difficult one to rate. But I think the Series 6 version of Corkscrew alone is very, very memorable. And I would probably, if we were doing this list again now, I think it would definitely make the list in the 90s or maybe even the 80s.
Yeah, looking at Disco Inferno in the 60 to 70 region, I could definitely see Corkscrew going as high as like 80-something or
even
bottom of
PP3D at 89. I feel like it's a pretty good comparison for Corkscrew as far as spinners that did big hits on machines but had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
I would also probably argue that Chomp would probably make my 100 now. It obviously has the classic and reboot span. It's got a combat trophy, and I think that unlike robots like Crustacean and Thermidor and even Razor, the reboot was not just like a weird flash in the pan moment. Chomp had a very, very memorable campaign in the reboot. And it's one of the highlights of Heat 5 of Episode 8. So I would definitely probably push Chomp a lot.
And even in Battle of the Stars Episode 1, when they made us watch it all over again, trying to really cement it as a big reboot moment. But I think the interesting discussion with Chomp a lot is honestly, which is actually more iconic out of its two moments? Is it winning the Iron Maidens, or is it the big lipo fire in Series 8? Because they're almost equal for me.
Yeah, I actually almost think Series 8 is more memorable for Chomp a lot.
I'd say the same, yeah.
Starting to lean that way.
Because it's not just the lipo fire, it's the round one. Like the fact that it actually got a combat victory over Pulsar.
Yeah.
Like, what a thing.
And Thermidor, to its credit. 'Cause
And
it couldn't
Thermidor
do it
too.
last time.
It would have been an absolute lock for the list, I'd imagine, if it just had more than one fight in the UK main series.
Yeah, before the reboot.
Yeah.
Like if it had appeared in Series 7 and lost in the first round, that would have probably been enough
Just
to
something,
make it on
just
the
that
list.
little bit of extra confirmation. Its moments were big, but we just needed that little bit more familiarity, I think, in general, to just seal its place on the list for good.
Yeah. I think, interestingly, some other ones in this group, though, they were never really close to making the 100. But one literally didn't even make the honourable mentions until we started seeing some people banging the drum for it. And that was Hydra. We didn't even really consider it as an honourable mention, but we sort of went back and made it an honourable mention because a lot of people were really passionately predicting it for like the 90s and even like the 80s.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it, because Hydra had always stuck in my mind as a good force in Series 7. It's a good force in fantasy tournaments. It's a relatively, I'm not going to say unique design, because obviously the Mortis inspiration is pretty clear, but it was definitely the one that carried the design forwards. And yeah, with a Heat final appearance and a Tag Team Terror, the stats are there. Hydra did do well. I just didn't think it was enough. It needed to, for me, win something to be in with a shout, or so I thought, because as you'll see with the order as we go along with it later, we tried to put a bit less emphasis on the later series of Robot Wars after the viewership had died down somewhat. Hydra, you don't really remember that Series 5 appearance, so it was more a Series 6 debutant. And I didn't think that was enough, but then sure enough, every upcoming episode we asked for predictions and Hydra was there every single time. Whether it was the same person or new people, we had both. And Hydra just, it wouldn't go away, so you guys proved to us, well, clearly it is an honourable mention.
Yeah, and especially I think it's to be compared with Getrix, who is the same design. The two robots fought at Hydra 1, and Getrix was actually originally on the list at like 90-something before we dumped it down alongside Beast of Bodmin. And I'm honestly glad, because I now look back at it, and yes, Getrix had tons of exposure in Extreme 1 and had that really famous melee in Series 6, but I really can't say that Getrix is more iconic than Hydra, certainly, especially if you don't have Vercingetorix with Getrix. You lose that long-time veteran exposure that in Getrix's favour. So I do think that ultimately it was the right call that we added Hydra in alongside Getrix.
Problem with Hydra was it never had a truly... Like, look at the honourable mentions visuals I put together. The bit I put in for Hydra was it lifting Getrix onto the wall. It never had a truly big moment, despite being a very good competitor. While Getrix was good fun, but it never did anything in the arena of note either. Like, it damaged Major Tom's base plate, and that was it. And nearly killed itself.
It axed Smidsy in the melee.
Yeah. I had to put it nearly going in the pit as its honourable mention visual with dramatic music in the background. Like,
which was
it's still better than what you did for 101. Alright, then our last four, Arnold A, Spikosaurus, obviously both Annihilator heavy robots. They're in very well liked episodes, but their lack of classic series
Yeah.
victories, we're never going to get them much higher than honourable mention.
No, I think these are
Spikosaurus,
very, very good placements for them. We acknowledge their really charming, impressive moments, but as you say, there's just not enough actual depth to them to try and push them higher than that. So I think honourable mention's perfect for them, really.
And I think that if we're doing the list now, Spikosaurus and especially Arnold, they're like ones that if you're going, hey, we're going to do a top 100, and you say, what about Spikosaurus and Arnold? I feel almost confident, even now, sight unseen, you'd be like, yeah, they're probably like in the 110 range. Sorry, Toast, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's just the only one that even really has a case is just Weldor on the back of, for me, it's always very closely associated with Cerberus, who did make it in the 80s. If it was entirely up to me, I'd probably have them in and around the same region, but that doesn't necessarily mean Weldor needed to be in the 100. More just that they were both similar level shouts for me.
Yeah. I was going to say Agrabot almost made it as well, but honestly that was purely off the back of the Razor fight.
The Razor fight and just
I
being
think,
there constantly.
Yeah, and I feel like Agrabot, again, in the honourable mentions, like that shot of Agrabot nudging the pinned Razor is really all you need for Agrabot. Some people like Alex the Hunted would say that the Smidsy versus Agrabot fights is a big one, but I don't really think that it's enough to push it anywhere near a list.
No.
And obviously Weldor. I don't agree on Weldor. To me, Weldor is the most tenuous of the honourable mentions. Cerberus, yes, they both had the same success in the World Championship, but I just feel like Cerberus the design of Cerberus pushes it ahead for me. Whereas Weldor, it just had 3 distinct looks, and they are all sort of all over the place, and felt like less of a character than Cerberus did. I certainly wouldn't have it anywhere near where it is, and to me, it's the weakest of the honourable mentions.
It at least has a little bonus of being fondly remembered for still being around, which was delightful news to us when that surfaced. But yeah, that's not necessarily 100 level stuff. So that'll do it for the HMs, I think. I guess before we get to the actual 100 to 91 region, we've got the covert honourable mentions, if you will, the ones where...
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
We would include them if our guidelines allowed for it. Certainly, it was very clear that the order of the list we created was based on a UK audience. That was the only way we had a hope of ever being able to make an accurate guess at iconic status. We had to focus on one audience, and that was the one where World Wars was biggest. Obviously, the United Kingdom. That, sadly, comes at a bit of a detriment to a lot of the foreign machines who found success in other versions of the show. And so there's some, like, for example, if you were ranking the iconic Dutch robots, then Pulverizer's going to make an appearance immediately. But even in a global list, does it make the 100? Perhaps not. Its main thing now is that the team is still competing with something else, but Pulverizer it did enough to discredit itself in the UK appearances, sadly, much as we love the team. But then you kind of have, I'd say, 2 or 3 foreign robots that also establish themselves in the UK audience's minds, but not definitively enough for us to have a proper crack at including them. Those would be the Revolutionist, Philippa II, and most notably Panzer Mark II and Panzer Mark IV. And it's still a bit of a sore point, I admit, because I would say if I have any sort of regret with the list, I would now want to find a way to push the boundaries and get Panzer Mark IV in there, even if it was just a one-off. I'll pass things over to, I know, Nick, you have a definite strong opposite viewpoint, so by all means...
Do I? I didn't really mind either way.
Well, that was a 180. Okay, it's time for the Panzer should have been on the list brigade then. If you
For
don't
me,
care.
though, I think the most obvious issue there is the fact that we have Black Hole. And I think that the consensus amongst us is that we would probably not include Black Hole now because it just creates so much problem with the rest of it. Like Black Hole, it has two very well-liked fights, but especially for me, Philippa is the big issue. Panzer and the Revolutionist, if you discount the foreign episodes, we're really, which we mostly did without really discussing it, we kind of just did that. Without including those, it really only has the second World Championship to go off, and that's really not much going on for the Revolutionist and even less for Panzer. But Philippa does have a lot going on from UK episodes. Like it obviously came second in the European Championship and it actually beat Black Hole. So to me, Philippa is the one that I would probably include now, probably at the expense of Black Hole. But yeah, that's the main thing there. Panzer and the Revolutionist, I probably would probably not still have, but Philippa definitely is the one that I would push for now.
Yeah. So to wrap up my thoughts on the three, Philippa, I still wouldn't. I would if it was merged with Dipoposaurus Rex, but unfortunately that's not really possible. Philippa, it certainly has the results in both regions. It just somehow managed to generate a lot of dispassion from a lot of people along the way. Not kind of anger in the same sense that, say, Cherub got a lot of infamy, which actually helped to solidify it as an icon. Philippa just kind of annoyed a lot of people, which I found strange because I was happy for it when it got those wins over Panzer and Black Hole. But
the only robot to have an come from behind victory that people are not happy about.
So it's met with enough indifference for me to say it's not quite making it, and also its UK debuts, UK appearances were locked only to series of Extreme. Panzer and Revolutionist for me, yes, on the strength of battles, they only have the Second World Championship where they also lost, and that clearly isn't enough for a list. But what they do also have, I know it's going to be met with a lot of hate, but they do appear in Robot Wars Extreme Destruction, the video game, and they were the only American machines there. And when you look at the quality of the UK robots they actually picked, they were all top 50 machines and suicidal tendencies, who in turn was in the 50 to 60 region, probably because it was the best robot in that game. And because Panzer was in that game, reaching hundreds of thousands of Brits who grew up with it, it then forced people to learn who those robots were. They found out Panzer was a double champion. The Revolutionist was an iconic design that is still around. And yeah, I think it's splitting hairs. It's kind of cheeky, but I think that is enough to say, yes, it's probably within the 100 iconic machines, even for a UK audience, if you ask me. But I know it's a lot of technicalities. I'd try my best if we were having another top 100, put it that way.
Well, that's the thoughts on that. Nick, did you have anything you want to add before we move off of the foreign favourites?
I personally just settled with what we were most comfortable going forward with. I think it would be nice to give a nod to them, but I was very much in the end happy to go with what we did when we came up early on with that kind of solidified viewpoint that it was just going to be UK based for the most part. So I can't say I have too many regrets personally, but at the same time, I really wouldn't mind if we changed our mind and thought as a group, yeah, let's go for it. So
yeah,
they have enough notability about them in their own right. So
yeah. And I suppose I should say, if I were included them, Revolutionist, I'd still only have probably in the 90s. But Panzer, I'd be aiming for more like low 70s, I think, if I could really
Yeah, I
push
think
the
that I
boat
could
on it.
probably. If we look at low 70s, like what's around that space? The 70 region was a particularly
We had
not
Berserk
great for
too.
combat victory
Oh
robots.
god.
So it's hard to rate there, but yeah, I would say that it would have fit in nicely in the 70s, replacing something like Berserk 2 or Rough Dougal.
That's going to be a bit of a punching bag going forwards, isn't it?
No, it looks just more in terms of its spot. All right, we might call it there because we are 45 minutes on the clock and we haven't even started the list yet. So we will come back to you very shortly with part 2.